Let's open with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this time in our lives when we can recharge and look at the world through new lenses. We ask now for your Holy Spirit to be with each one of us, bind us together, and open our minds, ears, and eyes to the messages you have for us today. We pray this all in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Amen. So, she doesn't need an introduction. We all know who Pastor Jennie is. Thank you, Jennie.
Thank you, Dave. And it is wonderful to be here with all of you today, those in the room as well as those who are joining us on Zoom. Welcome. My subject that I'm talking about today is called Reflections of a Hospice Chaplain. So I have been, I was ordained September 12th, 1982, graduated from seminary June of 1982, started my first church out in Seattle, Washington area in July of 1982. So I've been a pastor for over 40 years. Out of those years of serving as a pastor, interspersed among different pastorates, I have also served 12 years as a hospice chaplain. So the story of how I became a hospice chaplain, my husband and I, right out of seminary, served for 5 years as co-associate pastors out in the Seattle area, had our daughter out there, and then we were moving back east because we were out there, born child, and my parents, my extended family was in the Philadelphia area. His parents who were divorced, his dad was in Hawaii and his mother was in Southern California in San Diego. So we were as far from family as you could be, and we really wanted our daughter to have access to grandparents. So I think some of you can appreciate that. So we ended up moving back east, and my husband took a call in Millville, New Jersey. I chose not to seek a call at that time because we knew we wanted to have another baby. Chris Clark, who's now your youth director. And I didn't want to put a church through the process of calling me, and I kind of felt when I had a second one come along, I might need to take a step back and just have a few years to concentrate on raising my children before I got back into. But I also knew God called me into ministry. So I just said, God, you call me to be a pastor, you call me to be a mom, you figure this out. So we moved, and almost as soon as we got to New Jersey, a woman in our church there approached me, and she said, I understand that you're also a pastor. And I said, yes, I am. And she said, well, this is 1987. She said, we have a hospice, Cumberland County Hospice, and we don't have a chaplain. Would you be interested? It was volunteer at that point. They weren't paying chaplains at that point. So this is kind of the early days of hospice. So I said, yeah, I'd heard of hospice. I didn't know much about it, but I said yes. And so over time, I ended up working part-time there as a hospice chaplain for 8.5 years. Over time, I kind of brought up the fact that everybody else got paid but me, so then they started paying me. But so that was my first experience. Then my husband and I moved, we were co-pastors in Lancaster County for 12.5 years in Strasburg. And then we were moving to California. My husband wanted to do another THM degree at Fuller Seminary. I knew we were only going to be there a couple of years. So again, I did not want to go looking for a call. So while we were out there, I found a position working in a hospice out in Los Angeles County as a hospice chaplain for Vitas Hospice, which was a for-profit hospice, which is kind of a different animal than the nonprofit. So I worked there for 2 years, driving all around LA. Couldn't believe it. This East Coast person who knew nothing about them driving around out there, but visiting people in their homes. So that was my second experience as a hospice chaplain. From there, we moved back to the East Coast. My husband was for about 4 months head of staff at First Press in Westchester, and I was looking for work. He was looking for work. And that interim position ended for him. We were both still without work. So we said, we got to open this call up wider than just this area because nothing's moving. Took us to Michigan, where he was head of staff for 4 years. The first 2 years I worked for hospice again as a chaplain, and for Arbor Hospice. And that was a nonprofit again. The first one was nonprofit, the second one was nonprofit. So I was at Arbor Hospice for 2 years before I became 2 years the interim pastor in a church in Saline. And then we moved back here, and I've been at Westminster ever since. So that's a little bit of my experience of a hospice chaplain working when I've worked for them. But I've also since then had my own experience as a family member receiving for a loved one the hospice support and care. So my husband's brother, who he had some mental or some cognitive disabilities, so he died younger in his 50s and of stomach cancer. And so he was in California. We went out and he was in the hospital, and he was a character. He was holding court with all his friends from high school who were visiting. He kind of became a little celebrity to them, which he loved, but he was so nauseated and all of that. And I knew like this, he needs hospice support. So we talked with the doctors and we got that arranged. And once they put him on hospice care, they know how to treat your symptoms, your pain medicine. So they would give him some nausea medicine, like a half hour before they were going to feed him, like simple things like that. So he could actually eat again and not be sick. And we got him in a group home kind of place where he could receive his care until he died. My mother lived at Garden Spot Village up in New Holland with my father. And she ended up in skilled nursing a couple years ago with dementia, and towards the end of her life there, she came under hospice care. So our family again received that support of hospice for my mom, which was such a gift, such a gift. So I've experienced hospice both as a chaplain working for them, but also as a family member for a loved one having that as well. I'm just curious in this room or on the screen, any of you who have had hospice care experience with a loved one in your families? I'm seeing a lot of hands up. So you know a little bit from your own perspective of what hospice can offer and do. When I started it in 1987, I'd heard of it, but hospice was kind of the earlier days in this country in that time, so it was not as known. And I learned quickly what a wonderful gift this is for families when their loved one is needing that support. And I thought, I don't know how you would enter this final time of your loved one's life without that support that was available. So as a hospice chaplain and as a pastor, I've had this sacred privilege of what I call standing on holy ground with people who are facing those final stages of their life, as well as with their families in that period. And it is holy ground. It's very, very sacred time to be invited into someone's home or into their lives in this very, very poignant moment. And I return again and again, recognizing the sacredness of that. And I return again and again to words from a Roman Catholic priest, Henry Nouwen. And those words are this. Henry Nouwen writes, "To care for others as they become weaker and closer to death is to allow them to fulfill their deepest vocation, that of becoming ever more fully what they already are, daughters and sons of God. It is to claim, especially in their dying hours, their divine childhood, and to let the Spirit of God cry out from their hearts, Abba, Father. To care for the dying is to keep saying, you are the beloved daughter, you are the beloved son of God." And how do we say this? The ways are countless, through words, prayers, blessings, through gentle touch, the holding of hands, through cleaning and feeding, through listening, and through just being there. Some of these forms of care may be helpful, some not, but all are ways of expressing our faith that those we care for are precious in God's eyes. Through our caring presence, we keep announcing that sacred truth. Dying is not a sweet, sentimental event. Rather, it is a great struggle to surrender our lives completely. And there's a little bit of that quote. So this is a quote that for me captures what we are doing when we are caring for our loved ones in these final stages of their lives. It is sacred and holy ground that we stand on. And any of you who have walked that ground with your loved ones, or I know I was talking to Sherry, she was a volunteer for hospice. So I know that that is something that you've experienced as well. I know, Bob Young, you've done this a lot through the course of your ministry, walked with people on this sacred journey. So spiritual issues arise at the end of life. And the ending of life creates, for most of us, a little bit of a spiritual crisis. My existence, as I know it now, is about to come to an end. I heard one person speak about this. He said, when we're little and we ride that merry-go-round, you know, and you're riding, having a good time, maybe you're on a horse or something that's going up and down. And there comes a point in this spinning round and round that you hear a little click in the mechanism of the merry-go-round. And you know, when you hear that click, you're only going to go around maybe once, maybe you'll get a little another turn, but the thing is going to slow down and eventually it's going to stop. And that's sort of that idea of, I like that metaphor to describe, you know, what happens to us when we get to a point where we hear that click in our lives that we kind of know, oh, this might be the final round that I'm going to go around. Our concerns then become, you know, how am I going to face death? How am I going to say goodbye? How am I going to bring my life to a close? How am I going to help my family, the people I care about? Maybe I'm still working somewhere, but help to prepare them for when I'm no longer here, like what I need to pass on to them. When an illness occurs, people often turn inward to understand and deal with this crisis, and they might start asking questions like, why is this happening to me? Why is it happening now? What has been my life's purpose? Have I really made any difference with my life? What will happen to me when my life ends? So, you know, as we get closer, as our death approaches, we begin to have more of these spiritual concerns I think we always have them, but we kind of can tamp them down if we're not really at that point where, oh, it's getting real. And so these questions become more important to us as we get closer to that time where our life will end. So with hospice, as a chaplain, we want to honor, you know, I wanted to understand and honor the spiritual needs of those who I would be serving and those I would be visiting, both the patient as well as the family. So the first thing I always wanted to do was affirm that person's life has meaning and had meaning. So we do something called life review, where you're trying to help them just revisit their life and, you know, look at what's gone on and trying to find, lift up what in that time was really meaningful, or maybe something that was a hard thing they went through, but they got through it. You know, whatever you can do to kind of review that and find something positive to give meaning to it for them. The ultimate goal is that our lives should be a good story, that we want to leave a good story, even if we face adversary, maybe we're not proud of some things, but that we've overcome it and we've done something with that, made lemonade out of lemons. Another thing, we want to help affirm in this life review that our life counted, that this person's life mattered, that they did make a difference. Even if it was in some small way, they made a difference, and the world is a bit better because they were here. A way we do this is sharing photographs, or maybe just trading stories, listening to their stories, asking questions that might generate some remembering some stories from years before, facilitating maybe if there's a special place that they would like to visit. Maybe they are a veteran and there's a war memorial somewhere that they'd really like to get back to if they are physically able, or maybe there is a family place that was always a favorite, you know, the beach or the mountains, that maybe trying to see is there a way we could facilitate helping them get there, or treating them to a family celebration that they really love, you know, maybe every Thanksgiving the family to get. So is there a way we can make them able to be present for that Thanksgiving gathering or whatever it is? So just trying to find ways to affirm their life and help them where we can to get to those special places or events or people. The second spiritual need that I try to address is helping them to die an appropriate death for them, helping them die in a way that is consistent with their values, their wishes, maybe their earlier life. Sometimes a person is very intent on wanting to instruct their adult children about their estate or their advance directives or their wishes about their funerals or other rituals that are important to them. So trying to help them make this, what's happening, meaningful for them. And such conversations can be hard for families. So trying to help facilitate with the patient and with their family to have these conversations, which sometimes we don't want to talk about that, but we need to talk about that. And it's important to listen to the person who is dying's wishes, to what their needs are, and not to impose on them our fears or our beliefs or our biases, but to listen to what they're telling us, what they're needing, what they're wanting. And being willing to have that conversation is not always easy, but you know, we want people to live forever. So if we don't talk about it, maybe it won't happen, but it does. So I tried to help facilitate such conversations between families and the patient. Everybody finds their own way to die, and there's no right or wrong way. We need to find our way that feels right for us. And then the third spiritual need is trying to help people find hope beyond the grave. Some people find this through the comfort of their faith as Christians. Certainly many, if not all of us, find that through the hope of resurrection through Christ. But I was serving people that weren't necessarily Christian too, or didn't have strong faith. So I as a chaplain, needed to serve people of all faiths or no faith, and I needed to be there to support them as well. Some people take comfort in other ways that they could reach immortality, such as the idea that their body will go ashes to ashes, dust to dirt, dust to dust, earth, you know, back to the earth, that I will be part of the natural cycle again, that my body will go back into the earth. You know, for some people that was very meaningful and a way of continuing to leave something behind and be part of creation that will be ongoing. For some people, they want to leave their bodies to medical science to after they die, so that they can do research and learn more about how to treat people's illnesses and ailments, and train doctors, so they feel like they're giving back their body to be useful to people down the road who will benefit from the science and the research that can be done. Some people leave behind work accomplishments, things that they have donated a lot of money to for a philanthropic thing, or perhaps they see it through their children and their grandchildren, that I've passed this on to you. Now you, maybe it's a talent, or maybe it's a business or a career or a family tradition, but that somehow they're finding meaning in that they're their life continues through their children and their grandchildren. So quality end of life care is not about how you die, but it's about how you live. And hospice is a choice about getting help so that patients can live every day to their fullest and that their families can get the support that they need, so that whatever time is left can be their best time. Try to get symptoms under good management and trying to make them comfortable and trying to help the family to have the best final time with their loved one as is possible. So we're there to support the person who's dying as well as support the family members who love them and are navigating their own loss and their own feelings while they're trying to care for their loved one. I know sometimes we say, oh, so-and-so's gone under hospice care, and we think, oh, that's the end, that's not a good thing. But what they've actually found out in some studies is, this one study based on 4,493 terminally ill patients, they found those who got hospice care earlier than waiting. You know, some people say you go on hospice, you die immediately. So only if you die, only if you come on hospice care the day before you die. I mean, you're eligible 6 months before that, and a lot of times people put it off until the very, very end. But the longer you're on it, there's more benefit to it. And they found that people who are on it actually often will live longer than if they had not received that care and just kept going with the care that they were receiving. In this one study, they found people lived an average of 29 days longer than those who received their conventional treatment, which I thought was very interesting. So going on hospice care isn't necessarily a downer thing. It can make those final months of your life. And sometimes we discharge people from hospice because they do so well when they get hospice care. They rally. You're getting the top care you can possibly get. So sometimes people rally and do better, and we discharge them, and then they can come back on down the road, you know, when they need it. So how do you know when is a good time to turn to hospice for care? Ideally, hospice care should begin as soon as the focus of your treatment changes from trying to cure the disease to alleviating symptoms and providing palliative, which is comfort care. So when your focus changes from trying to do everything you can to keep you alive, you know, so I'll have more surgeries, I'll have more chemo, you know, whatever it is, to I want to be made comfortable. That's where the focus, that would be the ideal time to turn to hospice. And many families would tell me, I wish we had done this sooner. And patients, I wish we had done this sooner. And hospice care should be considered if any of the following conditions apply. One, if the disease has progressed to the point that there is no more hope of a cure, and you have decided to be comfortable and not actively seek further treatment for the disease. If you and your loved one choose to forego any further testing or hospitalizations and will allow the dying process to naturally happen. If activities of daily living, such as bathing and dressing and walking, have become too difficult. If symptoms are increasingly uncomfortable and difficult to manage. If pain is not well controlled. So those are some of the triggers that might make you think, maybe hospice care could be an appropriate way of caring now. With hospice care, a person who comes under the care of hospice, they are given the support, they're giving everything that they need to have a chance to complete their lives with dignity and comfort and in peace. They have an opportunity, you know, in that time to be able to communicate what is important, what is something they want to make sure that they say or pass on to others. So they have that gift of some time where if their symptoms are controlled, that they might have a little bit more energy or a little bit be more able to share those things, say those things, pass those things on. Hospice care also allows family and friends a unique opportunity to show how much that they have valued this loved one's life. Time for you to remember, to visit, to talk, share those moments, those memories with one another. And I know some people go, oh, I don't want to visit somebody when this day. I want to remember them the way they were, But that's, for that person, it's being able to say, no, you're still who you are, and I still want to be there to love you, to support you. And that's so important. So just some information about hospice. From the hands that went up, I know a lot of you probably already know some of this. So if I'm repeating something you already know, just bear with me, because I'm guessing there's people here who don't know all of this. But hospice care is available to people of all ages, infants to elderly people. Hospice care is covered by most health insurance plans, including Medicare and Medicaid. Hospice care is eligible for a patient when their life expectancy is 6 months or less, if the disease were to continue in its normal process. And physicians have to certify the appropriateness that a person can receive hospice care. So if a physician's looking at a person who's wondering if they're eligible, they will look at the medical diagnosis and what the track of that disease is, and they have guidelines, so that they have to be able to say, yes, we believe this person's appropriate. It's when the patient chooses to change the focus of treating the disease to palliative care. So if you're still wanting to keep going for treatments, wanting to do more hospitalization, surgeries, that would not be appropriate. But if you're ready to choose comfort care, that's when it's appropriate. Palliative care focuses on symptom control and pain management. And once a patient's free of pain and the nausea and the distressing symptoms they might have been having, that's when you start to experience that better quality of life. And patients can then have that energy that it's hard to have when you're in pain or when you're nauseated or whatever your other symptoms are. But they'll have that energy then to focus on what's important to them, what's important to their family. So it's a gift that we give people that opportunity to have that quality of life. And at any time that a person is receiving hospice care, they are able to revoke that care. They can decide, I want to further do treatment, and they can revoke and then work with their doctor to reestablish a treatment plan for their disease. A hospice team consists of a physician, a registered nurse, a social worker, a chaplain or a spiritual care director, a dietitian, hospice aide, volunteers, a grief service coordinator. And some hospice, and the hospice I served in Ann Arbor, Michigan, we had a pet therapist and we had 2 dogs. We had one, and it was so popular we had to get a second dog because the dog couldn't do all that visiting. We had a music therapist and we had a massage therapist. And some hospices have an art therapist. So, but all those things, except all those therapists I just mentioned, are part of your care team. So as a care team, we every 2 weeks had to gather and sit around a table and go through our patient census, and each of us would say from our area of discipline, what we were seeing going on with that patient and issues that had come up, because we had to make sure to keep recertifying that they are still eligible for hospice care. It's very regulated by Medicare, Medicaid, so you just have to document all of this stuff. Care can be provided in a private home, in a nursing home, an adult foster care home, assisted living facilities, residential hospice facilities, and also in hospitals. Hospice helps families with their ability to care for the loved one at home. So the predominant way that I served as a hospice chaplain, I would visit people in their homes with their family, and hospice makes available to you, if you need, a hospital bed can be brought in, a commode, or walkers, bedside tables, that you'd have in the hospital. There's all this equipment they can bring into the home to make it possible for this person, if they want to stay in their home, to stay there, and for the family to care for them. You had aides available who could come in and help with bathing or changing beds, or maybe making a meal to serve lunch to the person. We have wonderful volunteers who could come in. They're trained. If a family member had a doctor's appointment, they really need to go, or they just need a break. I want to go out and go for a walk, or maybe I want to go meet with my Stephen minister or something. That there could be a volunteer who could come in and sit in the home with the patient, to give that family a break. And what I found was that as families felt that support, their nurse was there visiting weekly, or sometimes twice a week. You had a phone call, an on call. If you didn't know what was going on in the middle of the night, you were worried, you could call. The hospice nurse could either talk you through it, or if they needed, they'd come out to the home. So you had that 24/7 contact with somebody always. And as families started doing this and having that support, I saw them become more confident and assured that their nurse knows when it's time to teach them the next step, because there's stages that you'll go through, and the nurses are wonderful. I'm not saying there wouldn't ever be a nurse that's not, but my experience of the hospice nurses, the doctors really trusted them. So if the nurses were saying, I think this pain medicine isn't working, we need to do that, like they'd call the doctor, and the doctor would listen to them and give them what they needed. If there's an emergency, as I said, there's an on-call nurse available that can come out. And after the patient dies, then there is grief support provided to the family for 13 months. So it takes you past that first anniversary of the death, and that there's grief support to you, and that they will have groups that you can be part of. I led, when we were in New Jersey, I led a children's grief support group while our grief support coordinator met with the parents of the children. So they met at the church where Steve and I were. And so, we'd have a grief support for the children and for their parents, and one for the teenagers, because you find a lot of people, if they don't deal with this grief, it comes out in bad ways. And children, might be having a lot of behavioral issues at school or whatever. Didn't link it, but it's because there's unresolved grief, and they haven't had a chance to process the grief. So we tried to give opportunities for children to do that, I would have them bring like a box and a picture of somebody, or draw a picture of something fun they did with their loved one that died, or we did a lot of creative things to try to help them process and talk about it. Hospice is reimbursed by Medicare and Medicaid, and most insurances also have a hospice benefit plan that pays for all or part of hospice care. The Medicare hospice benefit will cover the services of the hospice team, the medications that are related to the hospice diagnosis, and those that are utilized to control pain or relieve other symptoms. Short-term respite care to provide the caregiver relief. So sometimes the families, the person who's in the home receiving hospice care, the family has a wedding that they want to travel, go to, or that the family member's going to have surgery that they can't be taking care of. So there are respite, like we have a facility here in Westchester across from the hospital where people could go. Some people choose to be there temporarily. Some people I think might be there longer, but people could go. When I was in New Jersey, they did not allow us to have any in-person respite care facilities at that time in the 1980s. So we would admit somebody to the hospital as a hospice care which meant the hospital wasn't going to treat them like a regular patient. So they would not be doing blood work and, all the kind of stuff that you have when you're a patient in the hospital. They just did the comfort care so that so that Medicare would still pay for it. If somebody needs to go to the hospital, say you're at home and you fall and you crack your head open, you're bleeding profusely, and it has nothing to do with your hospice diagnosis, and you go to the emergency room and then they're going to admit you, we would go out to the hospital to revoke them, because if you get admitted under hospice care, Medicare is not going to, or Medicaid isn't going to pay for both hospice care and that. So you want to get them off so that they can have that covered and they don't get a bill. And then when they're out of the hospital, we would readmit them. But there was, at least in New Jersey, and I guess some places, you could be admitted as a hospice patient to the hospital to get just that hospice care for a short period of time of respite for the family. Medical supplies and equipment related to the hospice diagnosis will be provided. The initial hospice benefit when you're come under hospice care is for 90 days. And then after 90 days, a Medicare hospice patient can be recertified for an additional 90 days. And then after that, it would be for every 60 days, we would have to recertify that they were still appropriate to receive hospice care. I had patients in one of the hospices, like this woman was on our care for 2.5 years. So, you kept like, yeah, she keeps going. You could justify it. So, it doesn't mean you get kicked off if you don't die in that period. As long as we're still seeing how we can document that this is still appropriate care. And that's, the care will extend as long as the physician certifies that the patient continues to be eligible for hospice. So that's a lot of information. I just want to open it up for you to share questions or maybe your own experience of hospice care in your family or with somebody you know or love. Yeah.
Both my mother and father were on hospice, and my mother only lived like 2 or 3 months. Dad lived for 2 years, and then he said, "You're fine." And because he was obviously not having problems, and so they didn't need to interact. But,
so he was on hospice care at that point?
For a couple of years,
yeah.
And then they just said,
he's doing well. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
And I think he lived 2 or 3 more years.
Mm-hmm. When he came on the hospice care, did you see him kind of rally? Like, did they help him, whatever he was like when he first came on it, or?
We were concerned because we knew Dad, and we knew that longevity was in his line, and he had been uncomfortable. I think that was the main reason for putting him on. He didn't change much. He just was going to be that way and he was very happy. He said, "I'm blessed to be in this facility." My mom, she was the opposite. She said, every day there was somebody new that had irritated her. So anyway, it was, I think it's a great thing. I think the people that are underserved with the passing, to me, our kids, our grandkids, just until recently had never heard of death. They didn't know where she went. Is she behind the next door? Is she going to jump up out of the casket? So I think kids really have many questions.
They do. They do. And we want to attend their questions. But we also, children have what's called a short grief, in that the loved one dies, they're upset, they're crying, and I'm going to go out and ride my bike. And they'll come in and you might go like, if an adult did that, you go like, what is wrong with you? But that's how they handle it. They can engage with it, and then they need to pull away, go be a kid and come back to it. And So you learn how to help children with their grief, which is a little bit different than the way a typical adult would deal with their grief. Yes.
Are you still involved as a hospice chaplain? And secondly, have you ever had cases where it was really very hard for you?
Yeah. I'm not still involved as a hospice chaplain, although I still dream about it. I mean, sometimes I'll like be dreaming, you know, oh, I didn't go see that person, you know, but I'm not currently a hospice chaplain. And yeah, there were times that were hard. So I remember when we were in New Jersey, I was pregnant with Chris, and I was visiting a young woman who was my same age as me, who was dying of a brain tumor. And she had a little boy who was 6, and her tumor started when he was, I think, 3 or something. So he only knew his mother as being very sick. And I felt so conflicted going there with my big belly, you know, full of life, knowing she's dying, you know, and I thought, is she going to really resent me, you know, coming in, you know, kind of rubbing in her face, you know, we were the same age. She was lovely, and her little boy, you know, would be there and help her when she'd have seizures. It was, so that was a hard one. Another one that I found very hard. So it was again, a younger woman. She had children that were elementary age children. And she was dying. I think she had uterine cancer, and her church, like she was from an independent church, and like the elders and pastor and people from that church would come and pray around her, but they would not. It's like, if you have faith, you won't die. Like, that was the message. And they kept pushing that and pushing it. And I felt like, yes, God can create a miracle and she could be healed. And wouldn't that be wonderful? We would love that. But that was the only way they would be willing to talk. They were not willing to even entertain the possibility that she would die. And so I think it put a whole lot of, I don't know what damage that would do to those children's faith, because it's like, if you pray, you're not praying hard enough. Like, are they going to feel guilty that their mothers died because they didn't pray? So that was one I struggled with too. I thought, this could have some bad fallout for this family, this children, the way they were approaching this. I heard churches, elders and the pastor, that if you die, it's because you didn't pray enough. So, yeah, Dave.
Well, I study near-death experiences quite a bit, and one of the experiences was of a person dying and being surrounded by the women's group within the church. And she described how, you know, she would start passing and seeing friends on the other side, and then all of a sudden the women would get, and they'd start praying harder and harder, and she'd come back. And it happened like 3 or 4 times. And finally she said, I am ready.
Yeah.
Let me go. And I think sometimes we think more about the physical body, and, you know, we're not praying for the spirit, we're praying for the body.
Mm.
And there's 2 components that we need to think about. And some people are ready. Some people are ready before the people here on earth are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So do you ever hear of, or people that you were with, ever talking to friends on the other side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes they would see them in the corner up here. Yeah.
I believe that happens a lot more than people realize.
Mm-hmm. I saw a hand over here.
So do you, when people are asking you what to pray for, do you advise them to pray for an outcome, like fix my mother, or do you advise them elsewhere?
I've never had anybody ask me what they should pray for.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, people pray what's on their heart. I had an experience one time where I was called to one of the patient's homes. And I got there and there are all these cars outside in the street. And when I entered the home, like all the extended family had been called in, and I got in there and they were all gathered around the bed of the person who was dying. And they asked me to pray. And I prayed and we ended with the Lord's Prayer together. And then the person took their last breath, which was, wow, I've never had that happen. And then down the road, several years later, the same family had another family member and they invited me out to pray with that person. And, we prayed again, but they didn't die, you can't script that, and I think they thought I was gonna make that happen. And I sat with them for a long time, but, I ended up leaving because it's clear this person's time isn't right now. So I try to listen, when they're talking to me, if I were to be the prayer, or if they prayed, if they wanted to pray for that person's healing, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think from my perspective of faith, healing comes whether we're given more life on earth or whether we are brought home to God in heaven. And it's just a different type of healing. So I would never tell somebody what they should pray. That would be my my answer. But nobody's ever asked me, what should I pray?
Do you think people they live for a milestone? Like they live for Christmas?
I think some people do. Maybe there's a baby waiting to be born, or they're waiting. I mean, this was not unusual. Sometimes there's a person who was lingering, the nurses, nobody could figure out why they are still alive. There's no blood pressure. And it's like, is there somebody they're waiting for? And it might be they have a son out in another state that, and, that person gets there and then they can go. Like there's something like they're holding on for. And sometimes I would tell families, that the nurses would do the same thing, say, you can tell your loved one it's okay to go. Sometimes I don't know if they're holding on, waiting, like that they don't want to leave the family or the work, it's like, it's okay for you to, so sometimes families could say, Mom, you're tired, we're going to be okay. And we love you. But, you go when you need to go. And sometimes just having somebody say that to them, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much control we have over when we die, but I do think being at peace helps you. I do think if there's something you're still stressing about, waiting for somebody, or I saw it where, again, the family would be with the patient for hours and days and always somebody at their bedside, and they step out of the room to go get a bite of lunch and person go, like, sometimes I think people are waiting for everybody to go, that they don't want to go while you're all there. So this is all, thinking. I have no way of knowing, but that's been my observation. So Anne had a.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that. That happened to my mom. She was in a nursing home, a rehab, and she was very worried about one of her grandsons who was out of the country. She always took care of him. And when I finally told her, he's going to be okay, Mom, you can go. She died the next morning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, if you're worried and stressed, so you helped her find peace. So, yeah, go ahead.
How do you feel about euthanasia?
I'm not a big fan. And I know hospice care, that's not their approach. They will do everything they can to help you be comfortable, help your symptoms be managed, to help with the emotional, the spiritual, all the different ways of supporting people, rather than push this button and go. So I'm not going to criticize somebody who chooses that, but I would not promote that. Yeah.
Agreed.
I saw another. You go ahead. Did you have your hand up?
No, I
Okay.
think he's one.
Oh, Bob.
A couple of comments, one about milestones. My first wife was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in 2000. And my sons were in their middle of their first year of college. She lived to see them graduate.
Hmm.
And the doctor said to me, she used everything she had to see them graduate.
Yeah.
He said, she was hospitalized a week after that. He said, I think she's used up all she has and it won't be long.
Mhm.
And it was a week.
Mhm.
And along the same lines, I don't know if it's a near-death experience or what, but it was about 2 or 3 days before she passed. She insisted that her dog was at the foot of her bed.
Mhm.
And the dog had died 2 years before.
Mhm.
And she insisted she was
She
sick.
saw the dog. Mhm.
It's still emotional to you.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was.
of course, yeah.
Is there any differences in the way people from various cultures approach going into hospice?
We did have, because we were dealing with people of all different cultures, and especially out in LA, I found that because you had a much more variety of culture out there. So Asian people did not want to die in their home. I'm remembering this correctly. Because I think they felt like there was some spirit stayed in the home or something. There was somebody, maybe this was when I was in Ann Arbor, and I don't remember what the culture was, but we, like when the person would die, like we had to call somebody from their religious background. There's some certain way, particular way about how you handle the body that, was very, like they believe they wouldn't go to heaven if it wasn't done in a certain, I don't remember the details of it, but there were cultural things that we had to observe and be aware of and try to respect, the way people approach it. I can't say whether, then I don't know if there's any cultural reason people wouldn't come on hospice care. I'm not aware of that, but sometimes just the way we administered care, we had to take into mind particular cultural practices that were important to the family.
I've had one more thought in closing. This has been just great. I mean, I think we need to think, I need a gray hair, need to think about it more and how we can help our families, as we will be the ones passing at some point in time. But I remember when each house had a parlor room.
Yeah.
And the parlor room was where you would lay the body out.
And the living room is where the living stay.
Yeah.
So you had a living room and a part, like the manse that my husband and I lived in Millville, New Jersey, is an old Victorian house. And there was a living room and a parlor. They'd taken the wall out, so it was all one giant room now, but the living room was where the living, and the body would be in the parlor if you were having people visit in the home, the week.
And then somebody invented the funeral parlor.
Right.
And that's where that comes from. And so that was my concern about kids. That we don't talk about death. We don't. And I was so grateful Barb's mother passed this past summer. And the grandkids, they had 3 grandkids. And I thought, oh no, a trip to Iowa in one car. How are they going to survive that? And the kids had 1,000 questions.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when my son's great grandmother died, he said, I walked up there, Dad, I thought she was going to go like this and scare me.
Well, I had, so when we were in New Jersey and one of the patients that I visited died, and she died, she had dementia. she got very nasty, especially in those later years. And so they held the funeral at a funeral home, and they asked me to officiate it, and it was an open casket. And I remember before the service started, there were two of her little grandchildren that were probably about 8 or 9 years old, and they wanted to go up and see her body. And the parents were like, I don't think. I said, no, it's okay. I said, I'll take them up. And so they wanted to see her, they wanted to touch her. And the one little girl, she goes, she used to chase us around the house with a coat hanger to hit us. And I love her. And I was like, so this gave her, that was their grandmother, you know, she was speaking, it was the kind of stuff that you don't say those things at the funeral, you don't want to hear good stuff. But everybody knew, I mean, she was speaking the truth. Everybody knew this was, you know, how she had, this is how she became. And so she was, you know, the only children do, just telling the truth. And I loved her. And it's like, and we love her. And so I think children, we sometimes, I think we do a disservice if we try to hide this from them. I think there's ways, you don't want to force them, but at the same time, if you don't tell them truth in an appropriate way, they'll make stuff up, which can be far worse, you know, whatever they imagine it to be. We had books for our children's grief library. That there's one about 10 good things about Barney. So when the cat dies, you know, the family, everybody had to think of, you know, a good thing. They were going to come up with 10 good things about Barney, the cat, you know, and then the kids are like all the things that and then they had their little burial out in the backyard or whatever. So there's ways we can help our children before a big loss happens, you know, they lose a pet or, you know, something that's maybe not as drastic.
So one of the things I do is I pick up my grandkids and drive them down from Downingtown to our home. And I sometimes have on a religious station. I just love to get inspiration. And she said, they just said heaven. Is that where great grandma is? And I said, yeah. So it helps build in to them an appreciation that there's something, it's not just the end. She didn't just disappear. They didn't put her in this box and lower it into the ground. That there is life beyond life. I guess I don't think we talk about it enough. It's kind of a taboo, even in church. So anyway, I want to thank Jennie for opening our eyes. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.